Pressing record. Here we go.
Okay, great. Let's see. Perfect. There's someone in the waiting room, so. Okay.
Oh, that's Julie. I'm going to make her co-host.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great.
Okay, there we go. So I think we've got everybody.
Great. Let's start this meeting. Call this meeting to order. I'll run through roll call here. I think we have a full house. All right, Danny Theodoru.
Here.
Woo. Juliet Boone.
Here.
Terry Palmos.
Yes.
Mason Moyer.
Here.
Jacques Juliand.
Here.
And Judy Nog.
Here.
Oh, beautiful. Here we go. Full house. Good to see everyone. Let's review the agenda for tonight. Does anyone other than myself have any additions or, modifications? No? Okay. I would like to make a motion to add an agenda item after 5C to discuss the special session that Governor Polis has called for. I have some discussion points and I have a motion to make. So I'm hoping that we can approve to move that and add it to the agenda. Do we need a second or something? Yes, Danny, hello.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor? All right, motion passes. So Jay, will that just be added
Yep.
to the revised agenda? Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay, let's see. And now we can move to public participation unless there's any other amendments. I don't think that anyone's here to speak. No? Okay. Sad. Next time. Okay, great. So we'll go to the approval of minutes then from October 28th, 2020. Has everyone had a chance to review that? Any changes, edits? All right, seeing none. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Or maybe I'll make a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second, all in favor of approving the minutes from October 20th, 2020? All right, passes unanimously, I think. I think that was unanimous. Great. Well, that was quick. Okay, we can move to matters from the board then. I'm so thrilled that Julie and Sarah are here from, Julie is here from EFA, and then Sarah is here from the county. Thank you both for being here to talk a little bit about the Keeping Families Housed program and other efforts. So I'm going to turn it over to you both. Just excited to hear what you have to say, and then we can ask some questions.
So I'm going to share my screen. So both Julie and Sarah asked that we show a very short video, which might help set the stage for their talking points. But I think the idea is for them to just give a really quick overview and then allow the board to really ask questions and dig deeper into any topics that you might be interested in. So can you guys see my screen?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet? No, I haven't.
Here you go.
No, perfect. Let's share, here we go.
I was born in between the haves and have-nots, my granddad always says. Somewhere between mama's job and daddy's big break, my brother told me. I was born into the hundreds of families experiencing homelessness in Boulder. We sleep on couches and share beds, and sometimes we even sleep in the car. Wasn't always this way, but we moved more times than I can count. I am one of 400 kids in town that doesn't always have a permanent address. All I know is that I'm the first bus stop in the morning and the last in the afternoon. And in between, I ride and wonder why we live so far from school. I'm one of 20% of kids that wait in line for free and reduced lunch in Boulder. Sometimes it's warm, sometimes it's cold, but I'm always still hungry. So every afternoon, I ride the bus back to Grandma's house. We wait in line to pick cans and fruit from big boxes. I am part of 1,600 Boulder families that need services to make ends meet, but it isn't because we aren't trying. My mama does lots of different things. My daddy builds things all day long. She's gone before I wake up in the morning. He picks us up from Grandma's house in the afternoon. And in between, I wonder why they have to work so hard. We cut coupons and wear hand-me-downs and use the internet at the library and camp in the summers. We're lucky, my mama tells me. My parents have medium money, my sister says. And I trust my sister. She's the one who gets me dressed and helps me with my homework and texts me in at night. I might be one of 400 kids in Boulder who doesn't know where we will sleep next month or next year. But I do know that we will be okay. Be brave, Mama tells me, because life is an adventure, my granddad always says.
Thanks for showing that, Jay. Very much appreciate it. And thanks again, Julie and Effa, for making that video. So
the city, I have to give the city credit.
Yes,
city productions.
sure. Yes, that's right. The city contributed to that. So yeah, so Julie and I are going to just kind of go over some of the family homelessness work that we work on. Julie and I are co-chairs of what we call the Family Homelessness Subcommittee, and it's a subcommittee of the Family Resource Network, which is a Julie might be able to explain a little bit more about that, but it's a network of providers that work on family issues, from homelessness to childcare assistance, food assistance. Really, it covers all social determinants of health: food, housing, childcare, medical coverage, education. And so one of the subcommittees that's pretty well formed under the FRN is the Family Homelessness Subcommittee. So Julie and I co-chair that. Julie is the executive director of EFA. EFA works a lot on family homelessness issues and prevention. I'm the supportive housing programs manager at Boulder County Housing and Human Services. So most of my programs that I run are assisting families with rent assistance and case management to ensure that they either get out of homelessness or are prevented from entering homelessness. So together we work on this subcommittee that's comprised of EFA and then the other family resource centers, our center and Sister Carmen, our domestic violence agencies, SPAN and Safe Shelter for Progressive Alliance, SPAN and then Safe Shelter of St. Vrain Valley, as well as our McKinney-Vento liaisons from Boulder Valley School Districts and St. Vrain Valley School District, and of some representatives from Housing and Human Services, reps from the City of Boulder, and the city of Longmont. And I think I covered everyone. Bridge House and the one in Longmont that I'm forgetting, but they are all with us on the subcommittee, and we convene every quarter as a large group, and then we have working groups that are working on various things based on an assessment that was done and a work plan that was created. So I just wanted to share, I've never shared my screen with Zoom, but we'll see how I do. Share that one. Just, can folks see this? Okay, so this is something actually that Julie created, and it just kind of captures everything. If you think about family homelessness, it is a continuum where we're starting from folks who are either unstably housed or are in some ways experiencing, facing eviction. That's where a lot of resources go, where we want to prevent families from being homeless because the rental market is as it is here in Boulder County on whole, and especially in the city of Boulder, usually with the vacancy rates hovering anywhere from 0 to 3%. It's really important to make sure that folks stay in their homes when we can ensure that that can happen. So we help people with short-term rental assistance and even case management at that point to ensure that they can retain housing and not lose it. And then we also work with, if families do experience homelessness, then we don't have a family shelter in Boulder County at all. And that has been pretty intentional because shelters are very expensive to run and operate, and they are not in an ideal situation at all for families in kind of a congregate setting. So we do not have an emergency family shelter. Instead, the FRCs and the DV agencies, others have access to hotel vouchers. The domestic violence agencies do have emergency shelters because often folks are immediately fleeing very dangerous situations and need a place to stay that night. So between the DV agencies and the hotel vouchers, we feel for the most part, we are able to accomplish that emergency response. There are some gaps, but we really are working on shoring up our hotel vouchers as much as possible so that we can funnel resources into housing, because as we know, housing solves homelessness, shelters do not. And then if you go from emergency response to temporary housing with supportive services, the idea here is to stabilize a family and then identify what resources they might need long-term. Can they just get a few months of rent assistance or even a year or two of rental assistance with some intensive case management and then be able to make rent payments on their own or find a more affordable living situation? Or do they need something more permanent like a housing subsidy of some sort, move into family self-sufficiency or other various programs where they can get some more intensive supports? So then the long-term subsidized housing is really the golden ticket. It is the hardest to get, especially for families. It's the Section 8 vouchers that you might hear about. It might be some sort of project-based housing that you might hear about, which those are pretty rare in Boulder County. But the idea is that for those very few families who really do need subsidies long-term, where their rent is based on their income, then we try to secure as many resources as we can for long-term assistance. In this is also permanently affordable units as well. So the new apartments up in Tungsten Village in Netherland, often what Boulder Housing Partners does in the city of Boulder, they build a lot of affordable units. Boulder County Housing Authority and Longmont Housing Authority also build affordable units, as well as some other nonprofit developers that build affordable units in the county. So that's just to kind of give you a framework that we work with under in the Family Homelessness Subcommittee, and just as our acting agencies. this is the framework that we're working under usually with when we're talking about family homelessness. And then I'll just punt it to Julie next.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more about specific services and programs in the city of Boulder. But to start, just make sure I have my outline. I just want to talk a little bit about kind of the metrics in the city. There was a few in that video that was done a few years ago, but just to be aware, because it's not often a topic of conversation, child poverty and child homelessness, that you see on agendas and in the paper. It's quite hidden compared to, say, adult individual homelessness. But there's like 14,000 or so school-aged children going to schools in the city of Boulder. 2,500 are on free and reduced lunch. Overall, there's over 1,000 children in the city that live below the poverty line. And so that for a family of 3 would be around $20,000, $23,000. So just to give you an idea of how you can manage on that level of resources. The average family that EFA serves makes $15,000 a year and lives in the city of Boulder with children. And so that creates this fragility that tips families easily into losing their housing. There's well over 200 children a year in the city on recent counts that will go through an episode of homelessness. It's worth stating that you probably will not see them on the street. Most families do what we would all do, which is, knock on the doors of families and friends and couch surf. That's about 80% plus of the people going through homelessness with kids. The other share is between services like our housing, or they might be in domestic violence shelter, and only about 5% are actually physically unhoused, sleeping in their car. And those are these really priority cases that Sarah talked about, where we try and get immediately into a hotel, into housing of some kind. It's worth saying that, like, in the city, over 90% of households that make under 50,000 are considered rent burdened. That would be paying over 30% of your income on housing costs. At EFA, the average family pays 72% of their income on housing costs. So that doesn't leave a whole lot for food, clothing, emergencies, medical, et cetera, et cetera. So that is an underlying structural issue, if you will. And then what are agencies doing about it? The government and nonprofits have a broad array of services. I can speak a bit to EFA's. We have a basic needs program, which includes food, financial assistance, including rental assistance. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about. We have a physical housing program for families with kids going through homelessness. Around the county, we have 56 apartments. In the city, we have 22 apartments for families that are unhoused. They can stay anywhere between 3 months to 2 years, depending on the program. Comes with a lot of case management, wraparound services, support for the children, because it's quite a traumatic experience losing housing. The stress of it, the loss of schooling, the loss of the challenges to parenting, going through something like that can't be underestimated. So there's a lot of resources going towards these families to help them, chart a path to stable housing. We work very closely with Boulder Housing Partners on a number of programs to get families that are housing in unstable or insecure into permanently affordable housing as the main kind of housing partner from the public housing side. And that's kind of what SF's been doing for a long time. We've been in this community over 100 years and doing kind of the same thing. So very well known. And then COVID hit. So I want to just make sure that I spend a couple minutes just letting you know both, and Sarah can chime in, what's going on with COVID? Because that's usually a big question. What are we seeing in terms of evictions and homelessness and housing instability? Well, all of those kind of frightening statistics and, really heart-wrenching stories in the video were all before COVID. So it's only made it harder, obviously. So what you see is that particularly industries where low-wage jobs are concentrated, retail, restaurants, is where the largest job loss is. Families that are working in grocery stores, convenience stores, home health care, et cetera, tend to be at greatest risk for the disease. And so we do see that it's unequal who's actually getting harmed economically by COVID and who is ending up with COVID. It has an unequal distribution in our community, and we're seeing that. All agencies, public and private, have stepped up into the need to keep people from becoming unhoused. I mean, particularly during a pandemic. So we have scaled up our rental assistance programs. The county has channeled government funding into that. And just to give you kind of some idea, on pre-COVID times, we would do about $80,000 a month in rental assistance to probably 100 families or households. We also give rental assistance to individuals. That's more than doubled under COVID. We're averaging about $165,000 a month. We have helped 1,300 households since COVID started. 69% are families with kids. 65% are Latinx households. Often hardest hit because of the jobs and the disparities, but also maybe less able to access some of the federal and unemployment kind of assistance programs. That's been steady. We've seen about a quarter of the people that have come in for help have never needed EFA's help before. So that's pretty kind of classic narrative of safety nets. Some people need help pretty much, all the time. And then when a shock hits, you see people having to come in and get assistance. We're giving out rental assistance, medical, utilities, trying to keep the lights on. And it's been extremely busy, and we have not seen any let up, and it's an uptick is starting again. And I have a dog whining. Sorry. So that's what has been going on with COVID. We're doing, I think, a good job as a community coordinating a lot of the sources of funding. The county has some buckets, EFA has some buckets. We're harmonizing criteria. There's a housing helpline at the county that can get you to EFA. EFA can get you to the housing resources of the county. We have a very well coordinated system. And so far, I think that we've been like the kid with the finger in the dike. Evictions have been low. They're lower than normal right now, but we know that there's moratoriums. We're worried about what comes behind that. We're worried about households that have accumulated months and months of arrears. We're trying to find we have some funding to help with that. And in all of this, EFA has been fortunate to see the community step up in private funding. Almost all of that scale up, we've spent like 1.4 million in rent, and 80% of that has come from local individual donors in our community. We have the motto of neighbors helping neighbors, and it's just been really encouraging to see, and it's allowed us to put some of these unrestricted private money into areas that couldn't be funded by government programs. So we've been really busy, and we haven't seen a great uptick in homelessness. What we're seeing is a bit more on the doubled up side, but because of the pandemic, landlords are not kicking people out. probably where there's a concern is the increase in domestic violence, you know, that we're seeing across the country, and we're definitely seeing in our community in terms of causing housing instability. But we think it's going to be a long haul and a challenging winter to get through this. I did want to just say one thing about Keep Families Housed, because that was on the agenda. Keep Families Housed is a program we have with the City of Boulder and private foundations that we suspended during COVID. It was to families with kids could come in 3 times a year and get up to $600 each time in rental assistance. The first time based on need. And then the innovation in this program was the next 2 times was really based on essential investments in your children. So you had to have had the kids see a doctor and a dentist in the last 12 months, have an early childhood developmental screen, signed up for health insurance if applicable, signed up for food stamps if applicable, and that the parents would have seen a financial counselor through a county program that's free financial counseling one time. It was a very successful program. We scaled it up from about 300 families to about 450 over the 3 years that it's been going on since before COVID hit. And we did an external impact evaluation that found that no family lost their housing, that not only did housing hardships and housing insecurity reduce across several measures, but there are significant improvements in food security, in money management, in income and employment, because this was basically a financial safety net injection into households that were in a critical situation, and helped across the multiple indicators, including self-reported kind of stress and toxic stress, which is a big issue in parenting and in children's path in life. So we suspended that simply because we wanted to be able to see more people. So it's the same families, but now they're just coming in for emergency rental assistance. We've had to prioritize volume, if you will, so we can see more distinct households. But we will get back to that program whenever this calms down. And that is the Keep Families Housed program with the capitals. But we're all just trying to keep families housed right now in any way we can. So I'm going to pause there. Oh, one other thing. We presented a bit about direct services, but as you know, there's a lot of zoning and regulatory issues around housing that affect families and homelessness. We know we don't have the agenda time tonight to get into that. Things like EFA's taken positions supporting no eviction without representation. We supported bedrooms are for people, and I know that occupancy limits may be coming up again to the city council, and that might come across your desks in terms of work items. We consistently speak on affordable housing projects, mobile home strategy stuff, so if ever you need like an input from EFA or low-income households facing zoning and regulatory issues, we'd be happy to work with you on getting people to come and brief you from that point of view. And I think I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Julie and Sarah. That was really helpful. Just going to open it up, see if folks have questions.
I have some questions. Thank you both so much for coming in on pretty short notice, I would say, and thank you to Jay for arranging it so quickly. I think your programs are great, and I'm amazed that in all I've been on this board for 3 years, and I didn't even know this program existed. I knew, of course, about EFA, but I didn't know that this specific program existed. So I just have a couple of questions, and it's, what would each of you say would be gaps in services in your area that you see, if any, and what, besides lots of money, do you think would help both short-term and long-term?
I can start by saying, unfortunately, it is all of these things where we have gaps is because of lack of money. So it's kind of hard to think of like something where it's just in kind would be great. But starting from one end of the spectrum, I would say, you know, more hotels. We're doing a good job. City of Boulder is pretty good. The Hotel Association here has been a great collaborator with us. So the City of Boulder actually is pretty good. In Longmont and in other areas, it's a little harder to find hotels that are willing to work with us. Families can cause some damage, not just families, but folks can cause damage. And so I would say on that end of the spectrum, some hotel vouchers. In the middle, we're doing pretty well with, we have lots of different resources, which I didn't really get into tonight. One of the ones that we just got from the state of Colorado Department of Housing is a 2-year program, $500,000 for families who are doubled up involuntarily. So we can get referrals from the McKinney-Vento liaisons at the school districts and work to house families who are involuntarily doubled up with overcrowding and what have you. So that's exciting. And we actually have a lot of resources for the, 2 to 24 month period. Kind of what I alluded to before, permanent supportive housing for families is, the country is just realizing that that is something that's actually needed. It's not just for chronically homeless individuals. My dog is whining now. You need to stop. I'm working. And then affordable housing, really. And even the problem is that even our affordable housing that BHP or BCHA builds is not really affordable. If you really look at what it's still, that means that people are housing cost burdened. So that's like the magic pill. It's just costs so much, over like $150,000 per unit to build a unit, and to get that money back is just very, very difficult. I know that most housing authorities are having a hard time even being soluble at this point. So I think that those are the biggest gaps that I can name. And more money for supportive services and case management. Our case managers are severely underpaid, really, if you think about the work that they do. It's frustrating sometimes to see that somebody that does GIS mapping gets way more than a child welfare worker. And some more equity, looking at salaries through an equity lens, especially with our nonprofits, our domestic violence shelters, and even within human services in the city and county level. That's a big sticking point. We can't keep people. There's lots of turnover because the job is so stressful and the pay is so low.
I agree with that. I would just add, I think one of the gaps is actually a lack of awareness, to tell you the truth, on this issue. I think given the effect episodes of homelessness have on children for their whole life trajectory, the best investment is to eliminate this so that there are no episodes of family homelessness. And I think that we have it within our grasp as a wealthy community to actually do that. I've often cited this, that, with 5% of the city of Boulder's budget as a child transfer, no child would live in poverty in this city. That's how close it is to being solvable, because part of the issue is low wage jobs. So I'd love to see a $15 minimum wage in the city. Part of it is a regulatory environment that has created quite expensive housing, and it's harder for families, even on affordable housing projects. You'll often hear how many units. What I would ask you to do is ask how many units of 2 or more bedrooms, because that's, if you have lots of studios, that's great, but families with kids doesn't help. So just bringing that lens of family, bringing the lens of equity, I think that we as a community should do everything possible to have every kid that grows up in Boulder have a chance at life. And so if that means free RTD passes for low-income families with kids, so their kids can get around on the bus, access to summer camps, rec centers, et cetera, for low-income. I mean, there's a lot that we can do with existing services that we have. In terms of what, like, as a frontline provider, what we need, as long as we have low wage jobs and high cost housing and childcare community, this is structural. So the money is important in terms of being able to stabilize and prevent homelessness. I don't want to expand numbers of apartments for homeless families. I would prefer to have less homeless families and money going into preventing that. And that can be done in a number of ways. And the city's been great stepping in and keep families housed, and is a great partner. But we still have, and we have seen family homelessness actually numbers come down across the county pre-COVID through a concerted effort of all these agencies and programs. So I think in a way we are kind of starting to be a success story. I'm worried about coming out of this, just how many assets have been stripped of families, savings are gone, health crises have affected families in different ways. So it's going to take a while from an equity lens to climb out of this and get back on that trajectory.
I think, Julie, one more thing I'd add, and I have to be careful as a county employee because I feel like I'm going like totally against the county's public stance, but it takes courage, right? I think one of the main things that we have to look at as a county and as a city is, what do we value more, open space or human beings? And it's getting to be that point where open space and homelessness are, the linchpin, like the pivotal issues. Wow, I didn't do my nails. Can you guys tell? But it's like those are the crucial things that are starting to juxtapose each other. And there's a lot of people in county leadership and in city leadership where open space is more valued than humans having a roof over their head. So just saying that, I don't know if there's anything to do about that, but we need to maybe shift the paradigm here where we start to explore all this open land around us that could really actually benefit people if we could build more affordable housing.
Yeah, Mason, you can go ahead. I just had a quick comment on that. I can go after you, Mason. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment, and well, actually it's two comments. One, my good friend Jamal Gilmore says that prairie dogs don't pay taxes. So that's his argument over the open space piece. I just personally, a little anecdote to the work that you guys have done is in 2001, after 9/11, I was in the restaurant business and lost everything during that whole shutdown. And it was because of your services. I was a single mom of a young son. It was because of your services and keeping me in the studio apartment that I was in that I was able to go back to school and become a hairstylist. So it was a game changer. It changed my life, having access to your services. So I've written a thank you note, and but that was like, decades ago. But thank you for the work that you guys do.
That's so good. Sarah, I appreciate your comment, and that seems like a deeper can of worms, but there is this approach in this city that you can have great open space or you can care about people, but it seems like open space being this like amazing public type asset is good. People are just afraid of density. And so that's why, that's an excuse that's made. So, but I actually had a question, and that is, do you know like what the number of affordable homes, affordable units that we are short? Like, if housing is going to solve everything, and people need homes, how many units are we short for those who actually need to be housed? We're not going to provide solutions, like temporary solutions.
Right. Well, there's the regional, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with the regional housing plan that every jurisdiction signed on to within Boulder County, every city, every town, which was a commitment to increase the overall affordable housing stock by 12% in 10 years. And the goal was the shortage is more than that, but that felt like something that every town and jurisdiction could sign on to. I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, that the gap was more like 18 or 20% short of our housing stock. So there was some criticism that we weren't aiming high enough with the various entities. And I think that a couple, I don't know if it was Boulder or some, actually said, no, we're going to aim higher than 12%, but the minimum was 12%. So that's been a couple years since I looked at those numbers. I don't know if Julie or Jay, if you guys have any other numbers since then, but that's the general.
I would just add something to keep in mind that, you know, as we have these like build affordable housing that are permanently affordable targets, in the city of Boulder, there is no market available affordable housing in the market. You're always going to pay more than that 30% of your income. There's just none. And so it's how do we preserve what we already have? I mean, this is where I go against some of the folks on the housing side. Is I love mobile home parks because they have the deep sink of affordable housing in our community. And so I protect what you already have in terms of affordable housing. It's going to take a long time to build out to like publicly owned or funded permanently affordable housing. But in the meantime, people are living in Boulder paying, 70% of their income on housing costs. And so I think it's good to have these unit goals, but also just this kind of structural nature of housing in Boulder is important to keep in mind.
Totally.
How to make housing more affordable in the existing housing is the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and wages is another element of that you mentioned. I just have another question, and then I'll let someone else speak. But you mentioned that domestic violence has become an increasing problem during COVID in particular. And I'm apologies if you already mentioned this, but where, for example, can a single mother with her child go to get holistic care where she's safe and, secure? Is there a place where someone?
Yeah, there's a wonderful service, SPAN, Safe House.
Oh yeah, okay.
Nonviolence over there on 9th.
Right.
They both have a shelter as well as some units. We often have people come from SPAN, kind of stabilized in a more safe, controlled environment into EFA housing.
Uh-huh.
It's also, it's not a domestic violence, but Mother House provides housing for pregnant women at risk.
Right.
Yeah, and Safe Shelter, which is the equivalent of Boulder's DV shelter in Longmont.
Yeah.
Safe Shelter of St. Vrain Valley.
Of course. Thank you for reminding me.
And then the good thing about that is they're in a whole network. So if they're at capacity, then there's the whole Metro Denver network. And so they will find a shelter in Aurora if they need to for somebody, and they just kind of work with each other to find an opening. And because it's the nature of the beast, oftentimes folks are fleeing Aurora and they need to come here. So the other thing that we do with folks with domestic violence issues are any residency requirements we might have at our programs are waived if you're fleeing domestic violence.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And with EFA housing, it's we have housing in Longmont, Lafayette, Louisville. So that's a whole system that is beyond just what we have in Boulder, and people move around or escape to another community for, or transition out of domestic violence into a community away from where they were living.
Right. Yeah, Danny, go ahead.
You're muted.
You hear me?
There you are.
Okay. Hi. So Julie, you mentioned several times, your perspective on the regulatory environment and how that has an impact on a lot of these issues. And I'm just curious as to how thoroughly you've had an opportunity to really kind of scan the landscape of both city and county regulations and how they impact those issues, because it's certainly something from the broader affordable housing standpoint that we've been wrestling with for the past few years. And I mean, I think it's all part of that same soup. And it's certainly a daunting challenge to try to figure out how to deal with that, but it is something that merits consideration as well. So I'm just, wondering what insight we might be able to share.
Well, it's hard. Before I was at FI, I was the mayor of Lyons. So I saw it from the public side as well. So I do have a bit of a broader view than just from my agency on this. And I think and I'm an economist by training, so I do kind of think you get the outcome that you plan for in a way. It's Boulder has an expensive set of regulations for that then transfers through to costs of building, costs of rental, it's tough when I think what people hear is, well, you can't go up, you can't go out, and you can't get denser. And so if those are the answers, I don't see how we solve the problem except through this kind of longer route of public investment in permanently affordable housing, which is expensive and takes a long time. And in the end of the day, it will push into the planning preserve and into neighborhoods where they might not want it. So it doesn't get you off that hook. Let me give you an example. I went into the mobile home park strategy discussion. And I listened to things that were sounded really good. Like, we're going to clean up the mobile home parks, make sure they have meet energy efficiency regulations. And I thought that's just going to raise the cost. And there's no place to go with those costs. And if you look at the per capita energy use of a mobile home park resident versus the person across the street with a 4,000 square foot house for two people, whose carbon footprint is bigger, So I do think you have to kind of bring this, kind of tough equity lens. And I'm, environmentalist my whole life, but how do we solve this problem so that people are not in such straits? We have built transitional housing in North Boulder, and I have to say it was one of the most frustrating experiences of my adult life, bar none. The hours spent in the planning office, the additional costs, you have to hire architects to do. I mean, I had to get a lighting engineer, it was just oh my God. And we were building 5 transitional housing units. So I don't mean to make too light of this, but it's I think you have to challenge all of this. Are we getting just expensive housing because that's what we want in the end of the day? We got a lot of criticism for taking a position in support of bedrooms are for people. It's well, why would EFA take that stance? Because, you're going to destroy the quality of life of the Hill. And it's well, we're talking to our participants and they're saying how they're surviving getting roommates and getting, that doubling up is often illegal under housing. So we hear, if you can get the voices of low-income households and what they're going through, it's so illuminating in our community. And yet, they don't usually come to hearings or, feel
I would just say on the doubling up thing too, I always remind my staff that when we're thinking about a self-sufficiency plan for people who are finishing assistance, a voluntary doubled up situation, even though it might be illegal, is really sometimes the best option. So I live in a voluntary doubled up co-housing situation that's not necessarily legal. And most of my staff live, and we have salaries and our Boulder County employees, most of my staff live in a co-housing voluntary doubled up situation. It's just the reality of where we are. So just to bring a human, it's not just our participants, it's most of the people that I work with who aren't, and even those who are married and have kids, they're choosing to do this. Don't tell anybody.
I guess you got the two radicals to come today. I can't like.
Thank goodness. Go ahead, Jacques.
I just wanted to say to Julie and Sarah that I really appreciate hearing from you guys tonight. And I think that you bring the perspective of what's actually happening out there to us. And I appreciate the fact that you talk to all of the elements that impact this, because it is a reality that you can't have everything. And I'm afraid that Boulder wants everything, or at least a certain slice of Boulder wants everything. And so I guess I just wanted to say I appreciate the perspectives that you guys have given to us. And I know that it's something I fight with, the regulatory structure too, Julie, because I design and build homes.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine how you do that.
I've spent an amazing amount of time and energy, and unfortunately people have to hire me to have an ADU approved in their backyard. People are trying to do something for 100K and they've got to put 15 or 20 towards unnecessary architectural BS, to put it mildly. So I think that is a massive piece of it. And I'm glad that you've kind of reinforced at least my belief that that's one of the slices of the pie that we need to engage with. So thanks.
Hi, thank you both so much. I had a question. You brought up the bedrooms are for people, and that is kind of a hot potato topic here in Boulder. And I feel like sometimes people just have strong opinions, but they don't know why they have the strong opinion, or they don't have the information to back it up. And I'm curious if you could perhaps articulate what percentage of your people that you help, the families, the households, whatever the metric is, do you think would benefit from this change in regulation? I think if we could quantify it and understand it and talk with people about that specifically, because people on the other side saying, well, if you allow that, then you're going to create a free-for-all for landlords who are going to charge by the head, and they're just going to make X number more per structure, and it's not really going to benefit people and create more affordable housing situations. So if you have some information on that or insight into that, that would be super helpful to understand.
You know, I don't have that. I don't have that number. I don't know that number, what people would actually, you know, what actual changes would occur. But, you know, EFA has a participant advisory council where people that use EFA services have a council at EFA and review public policies and EFA services. Two of them sit on our board of directors, very vibrant, very interesting. And they would probably love to come talk to you if ever you want to hear from them. We took this to them with that very same question, like, how is this really of benefit or use to you? What if would it raise housing costs? Because that is the counter argument. And to listen to their life stories, it was just, to a person on that committee had personal stories of how doubling up or having roommates or having these different housing arrangements help them get through divorces, help them get through domestic violence, going to another, to a friend's place to live for a while, help them get, stay in Boulder and be able to afford it. And one of the things is they're able to share costs that you don't think about. They're sharing costs of internet, they're sharing costs of food, they're watching each other's kids. So this thing about, well, landlords are just going to make more money by renting one more room out. I don't know where the elasticity of that is, being an economist. I don't think anyone knows. So if anyone thinks they're telling you this is actually what's going to happen, then I would like to see that modeling, because it could go either way. But what I do know is what those people told us. And that's why EFA took the position, because there was a lot of reticence from, are we going to lose donors? You know, is this the right mechanism? And it was so loud and clear from these stories, and they were unanimously in favor of this. And so EFA took this stand. And I know there's a question about like dorm type living on the hill, but there is all the rest of Boulder to think about too on this. And we did take some heat, so.
Well, I think it's great to have some context like that, and that's maybe where we can support by making recommendations from a regulatory standpoint in terms of how do you frame it so that you're benefiting the people that you really want to benefit, and you're not creating financial incentives for people who don't, if that's in fact the case of what might happen if you were to put something like that in place on the Hill. I have students living in illegal housing on the Hill who are at CU, and the lease says 3 people and there's 5 people, but the landlord conceivably could not make as much for a single family home if they were renting it to a single family, or it would be unaffordable to a single family compared to 5 college students.
Well,
potentially
about the number of bedrooms, because I've heard that argument. Well, how can they compete? But you're still no low-income family is going to rent a 4-bedroom and only use 2 of them. So some of these things is you just have to kind of figure out, okay, what actually happens, as you said, like who does this actually change things for? And I don't know. I think it's contentious for a reason because of a change in what I don't know, a certain segment of the population feels might affect their properties. At least, I guess I am kind of like being a little open tonight, but and the
certainly
question,
that's an argument that's been made out there for sure.
That would benefit from it. Yeah.
I think it's just helpful to always try to get as much information as we can about both sides so that each side can understand the other, and there's a way to come to some kind of consensus and eliminate some of the fears that people might have. So that's why I'm probing that a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up, Juliet. Any other questions for Julie and Sarah? It's been tremendously helpful and just great conversation. So.
I do want to offer our participant advisory council, if ever you want some input from a group of low-income residents that are living, in Boulder in housing instability. They just got training from someone in the city on how to testify in front of city council. So even just like how to develop that voice. So I just want to put it out there if everyone, we'd be happy to arrange, and I think it would be great for them to also be able to kind of hone their public voices on these issues.
Julie, that's a brilliant idea. Maybe we could schedule something like that for the start of the year, because I don't think we have a meeting in December, right?
We do.
Okay, but that would be really great just to have them put together something that they'd like to say.
Housing issues, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wonderful. So we follow up offline. I'd be happy to.
So good. Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you all very much. It was a great opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank
you.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, that was so good. I'm really glad they came. Judy, I know you initially brought the keeping family housed program to light, and so I just want to make sure you got what you needed, and you felt like.
Oh yeah, it was fabulous. Yes, yeah. It was only last week that I heard, that I heard about this at all, and I realized that's a whole chunk of people who are unhoused that we hadn't talked about before. So yeah, it seemed really great. Thank you. And thanks to Jay, really, because Jay, you did it really fast.
Thanks, Jay. Okay. Well, let's move on to 5B. This is the committee and project liaison reports. So Judy, I'll let you speak again on the joint committee and provide any updates that you feel are relevant at this time.
Okay, sorry. So I talked to Charlotte earlier today. I can't remember if it was by email or on the phone, but I want to let everyone know that at the HRC meeting on Monday, they made somebody made a motion and it was voted on unanimously that they're taking to City Council. And I'll just read what the motion is. If you want to hear more about it, I can tell you more, but it was the City of Boulder Human Relations Commission recommends that following the successful model regarding the city police, the Boulder City Council immediately appoint a diverse and representative, including individuals with unhoused experience, oversight committee for city programs regarding the unhoused, and formally begin an investigation into possible human rights violations by the city. That was what they voted on unanimously. So I just wanted to let you know if anybody wants to know more about it, I can send you the whole, there was like lots of paragraphs of whereas this, whereas that, whatever. Anyway, so the joint committee met again on Sunday and is winding down and is preparing a maybe slightly over 2-page report that I will send to you, and probably in a week, more or less, for you to give feedback to us. And they will do the same with HRC. And then our hope is that you will use the information we've had to do whatever you want each separately. And there's a natural diversion in goals and interests. HAB, rightfully so, is interested in things like tiny houses because we're the Housing Advisory Board. They are less interested in, although they support tiny houses, they're interested in things like they have concerns about the language that the city used in talking about unhoused people for whom services are not available. They're now called service resistant, and they feel that has a negative connotation. So they're going off in a different area. So we're hoping to present this information after we get your feedback, and that you can each separately do what you want. And we're planning on concluding fairly soon, within the next month or two, by the end of the year. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Judy. Initially, my first question is, you say the unhoused committee is wrapping up, or the joint committee. So are there I recall that there were other issues there, things you wanted to discuss as a group or explore. Has there been discussion of continuing this into 2021 or?
Not with this committee. There doesn't seem to be the interest in doing it together. The topics that we're still addressing, and we'll address in this, in addition to the tiny homes and safe parking, referring to that, talk a little bit about encampments, and talk a little bit about an oversight committee, and talk a little bit about the data. We've done a whole lot of investigations into data in general, city data and the dashboard and all that. So
okay. And then back to the this, was it a resolution, or what did HRC call this agreement? Or
I guess they call it recommendation to council, and they're having Clay, who's their liaison, take it to council.
Okay. And so back to that just asks council to appoint someone, or someone from their board, or
to form a whole oversight committee.
Oh, a committee, so a group of people that council chooses, or will HRC, do you know if they'll have input?
They didn't specify that, and I don't know what they have in mind.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Judy?
Okay, I'll go back to mute then.
Okay. Well, thank you. You can always follow up with Judy if you have any questions. Then I guess we'll move on right now to Jacques and Terry. First spotlight. Tiny home, your tiny home, whatever, your report or discussion, or I'm just curious to see what you've been discussing. And
That's not the name of their podcast, is it? Tiny Home Whatever?
I don't know.
Could be.
Renaming them to mobile ADUs.
Madus?
Yeah, Madus.
Is that a code? Is that code? Okay.
Well, I mean, to be entirely honest, the amount of time and effort that I've been able to put into it has been not as much as I would have liked, but I kind of, and Terry and I have just had a little bit of engagement on it. I kind of sat down, and I think there were two major points, and Terry, just jump in and whenever, but there were two major points that were of some interest from my understanding. One was that the possibility of getting mobile tiny homes, or what we call tiny homes on wheels, and getting that somehow incorporated and to become, allowed through the regs here in Boulder. That's an area that I kind of focused on. The other area that I think exists out there was the interest in, is there the possibility for a development, tiny home village or development of some sort? And I haven't done any work on that side. I've only looked into the mobile aspect of it. So that's where I am on it. And I put together, let me see if I can find this document and I can screen share. Just an overview. And Peter, I'd love to hear any inputs, critiques, questions from your side as I kind of lay this out. And I also want, before I get started, I want to say that Terry and I, in the discussion about this, I think we recognize in a way that the real hurdle to this is probably more a political hurdle, so to speak, than anything else, and a perception hurdle of what is it. But that said, the potential benefits, I think we've talked about a little bit. We've heard about them. I think it was Alan Peake and that other young gentleman who were at our listening session, I think, spoke pretty eloquently about the benefits of them being able to have a tiny home that was mobile, that they had created, and that could be moved around. So I think that is one of the aspects of it, just kind of the security and the value. And of course, the value is something that's debatable. I think, once again, as we heard from Julie and Sarah, there's a little bit of a perception and what is your perspective of value? And I know that that's one of the pieces of discussion. It's like, well, this isn't actually a good investment, but I think that the perception of what's a good investment varies depending upon the audience. And so I think that there's a value from that perspective. I think there's a potential value also from the perspective of the homeowner who could have a temporary or part-time engagement with some income stream, which also comes at a fairly low threshold of investment from their side, relatively low. So it's a lot less expensive than putting a full ADU on. Essentially, that cost of investment is split between whoever would put something on that pad and the homeowner has that pad. So in some ways, it lowers the bar on both ends there. And again, going back to Sarah and Julie, it's, as they said, it's really just the question for this city is, are we going to create more housing units? Because if we don't create more housing units, we're not going to address affordable housing. And I think that's kind of the bottom line. So this is one way where we're already close and we could possibly step in. Terry, you're mute.
Oh, sorry, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's really well said. You know, in our minimal conversation, my focus is more on fixed foundation, you know, backyard tiny homes for a myriad of reasons. And I think they have the most important reason is I think they have the best likelihood of actually happening in a major way. I think that there's a lot of benefits to a fixed foundation, you know, backyard tiny home. The list is long of benefits. I don't know, we need to get into all of it right now, but for me, the infrastructure as far as streets and lots and all of it is there. We have thousands and thousands of backyards in this town with single family homes that have room to build fixed foundation, tiny homes. I think the regulation, as much as nobody likes going through the city process, I think there's benefit in it because it creates certainty, it creates reliability, it creates dependability. People can weigh in. There's a process that it goes through. You know what you're getting at the end result. I think neighbors appreciate that. Neighborhoods appreciate it. There's just a lot of benefits in my mind to fixed foundation backyard tiny homes. Design flexibility, being able to do a ranch, have a basement, have a 2-story with a basement. Access to a backyard to build is a lot, in my opinion, easier on many lots than a mobile tiny home, being able to get that back there if you don't have a huge lot. So anyway, the list is long. And for me, the benefits of being able to put 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 fixed foundation tiny homes in Boulder can be done pretty easily. They add value to the property. They create an income stream for the property owner. They put roofs over people's heads at a lower rent basis. And I think you can get the political will because you won't have the neighborhood opposition that you might have for mobile tiny homes to get there. I haven't dug into the zoning. I know you mentioned something about that there's zoning out there that allows for it now. I know you and I one day went up to North Boulder and looked at one that had been built years ago and is great. And it's a really, really nice structure that works really well for the people that use it. But I don't know about the zoning yet. I haven't dug into that. That's something I want to do. I just didn't have time. But anyway, my 2 cents is in the world of tiny homes, I think backyard, fixed foundation, tiny homes are our best bet to do something significant. The tiny home village concept, I think is great. I love it. It's just, you need land for that. And there's just not a lot of land in Boulder to do something of any significance on that level, but I do love the concept. I'll withhold my thoughts on mobile tiny homes because I know it's kind of a hot topic a little bit, but I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, guys. Mason, go ahead.
2 questions, Terry. What do you see the difference between fixed foundation tiny homes and ADUs are?
Well, from the ADUs that I've seen, they're typically part of a house already. They're usually somebody's basement, or somebody has some piece or parcel of their existing home that they're sectioning off, creating another entrance, whatever it is, to create an ADU versus going into a backyard and building a whole new structure.
Yeah. Jay, correct me if I'm wrong. ADU, although those 2 elements are possible, there is actually going in and building a separate one, correct? Yeah. And we did just go through what, 10-year process on this, and we got it to a point where we increased overall approval saturation, what, 30%, and within your neighbors, and we increased the overall housing inventory by less than 0.5% based on our 10-year program, correct?
Well, just a little, little more context. So, yeah, we started at 0.5% of the housing stock were accessory dwelling units. Since we adopted the update, and that was what had a role in making a recommendation to council. I just got the numbers, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago. We've more than doubled the number just since the update. So
Great. So we have what, 150?
200. We have almost 500.
500. That's fantastic through the whole city. So with our housing stock, our total housing stock is what?
We're at, what are we at?
42,000?
30,000,
Is it 30?
35,000 units roughly.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
500 of that is what percentage?
We're at
Yeah, but
1%.
that's not a fair analysis, because a lot of that 35,000 units are multifamily attached.
Right.
You know, you got to look at single family homes and single family lots.
Right.
Okay,
I guess I'm more curious about the difference of tiny houses as on fixed foundations to ADUs. And my understanding, and Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the square footage of those are the same as what a tiny house on a foundation would be as well, correct?
It's pretty comparable.
Yeah.
But the living
You've already got
situation is different.
About
Maybe
it.
the
You already
living-
got, so it's kind of a, is it a moot discussion then that we
No, it's not.
tiny houses as ADUs, because we already have that in our packet?
Can I?
No, because the living setup is different, generally speaking. ADUs so far as I know, is, yes, they're 300-400 square feet. Yeah, but they're attached, they're underneath, they're next to it. They're not,
No,
it's not
they're
a-
not.
Unless
Terry.
they're
That's what I'm
detached.
saying. They're
Unless
not.
they're detached.
I think
So
many-
that is one you can attach, you can put it underneath, but you can also put a structure in the backyard.
I don't know the numbers, and I don't know, Jay, if you have that kind of granularity on the numbers, but I know that a significant number are detached. I think that, and Terry, I think you're right about the hoped for impact. And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, please. I believe currently, since we adopted Appendix Q of the 2018 IRC, which was adopted earlier this year by council, we essentially have the ability to put a tiny home ADU, in other words, and tiny just means, in this case, it just means under 400 square feet. That's the division line. So if you want to differentiate, but essentially for on a foundation, there is no hurdle to creating a 200 square foot ADU anymore, because the Appendix Q in the IRC has allowed for the regulatory structure to do that from a building perspective. I don't believe there are any zoning, and this is where Peter, you might know, I don't believe there are any zoning limitations on that other than the standard limitations for an ADU. In other words,
Saturation limits.
saturation limits and all the other pieces, yeah, that
Yeah.
come into play.
It's not something we've
The
addressed
square
recently.
footage thing.
Charlotte may know though.
Go ahead, Peter. Hey, Peter, how you doing?
Hey, Terry. We haven't dealt with Appendix Q in any real detail. And talking about what the building code does or does not allow, or what obstacles are removed by that. I wasn't sure if Charlotte was trying to jump in here or not. If not, excuse me.
No, you're good. Lots of people were speaking, so let's just try to maintain some sort of decorum here. But I actually don't know. To be totally honest, I tried to help a client with an ADU in Boulder, and they had to get on a waiting list, and they've been on the waiting list for years. So see how that's going. There you go. Figure.
ADUs have to be under what, 400 square feet? Is that what it is? Is that the
No.
threshold?
No.
Yeah. Sorry, Jacques, go ahead.
So my understanding of it currently, and I have permitted a couple of these recently for clients. So, and then this is part of the changes to the ADU regs that we had our recommendation on a while back. So up to now it's 550. I think it was adjusted slightly upwards. It was 450. It's 550 for an ADU that is not permanently affordable, that is not limited, and then 800 square feet for an ADU, a detached ADU that is permanently affordable. So there's that little bump up to go to a permanently affordable condition. You can go to 800 square feet. There's the waiting list, Charlotte, that you were talking about is really, and Peter might have these zones in his head better than I do. Certain residential zones have that saturation limit, others do not. And so it depends where you are. And yeah, you could be in a neighborhood where there's a 20%, even that 20% saturation still just puts you on a waiting list. So I think from the saturation and how many we can put. However, a lot of the zone of the residential zoning doesn't have that saturation limit on it, quite a bit. So Terry's point of how many of these can we get, I think the real question, Terry, comes down to how do we try to, is there a way to incentivize that? Because I don't believe there are any limitations from the city's perspective, other than the process, which is painful.
It's funny, there's been all these articles out lately about tiny homes, and one I read recently was a California developer was going and renting, leasing, working out deals with property owners to effectively lease their backyards for a long period of time. And they will go in and build these tiny homes, fixed foundation tiny homes. And you can get them on Amazon anymore. I mean, it's unbelievable how many different forms and types and shapes there are. And they're giving the property owner who owns the main house a little bit of rent. The property owner doesn't have to do anything. The developer goes through the whole process, builds the tiny home, and then they rent it out, and they make the spread, obviously, right? And so I don't know that would work around here, but I think there's, to me, the opportunity. I love talking in theory. The theory of everybody needs a home. Everybody needs, that's all great, and I agree with it. But how do we do it? How do we actually make it happen? We have a great affordable housing program in Boulder that's working great. It's nationally recognized, and it does better than most any other affordable housing programs, and that's wonderful. In addition to that, though, how can we do other things that can actually get done? And if you can go to property owners and say, look, you have a big lot, you have extra land, how can we get more roofs in the backyards of these places or on the side yards like the one we saw, right? How
Can
do
I
we do
finish
that?
my second question though, Jacques, before you go on? Because I had two
Yeah.
questions. One was the tiny house one, and the second question before we go off onto a tangent on that. And
Wait,
I agree with
Terry
you.
done?
Say
Sorry,
again.
was Terry done speaking? Sorry, Terry, were you done?
Sure.
I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that you were able to finish your point.
I appreciate it. Well, all I'm trying to say is this provides an opportunity to actually get a lot of housing built with our current infrastructure. And I think that needs to be explored and promoted and enhanced and fostered. That's an opportunity here. We have an opportunity. We have a lot of single family homes in Boulder. We have a lot of excess land on those lots where the single family homes are. If we can build 300 square feet, 2 stories, 600 square feet, throw a basement in 900 square feet, that can be a 2 to 3 bedroom place that can be rented for a lot less than a 3-bedroom regular house in Boulder. And it allows people to live in our community that we need to live in this community I think easily. I think it's easily done. That's my 2 cents. I think what's happening is there's a big push between, oh, well, we want mobile tiny home model. And I don't, personally, I just don't see that happening for a myriad of reasons.
Okay. Peter, did you have a quick comment?
Sure. A quick follow up to Terry's point. I remember the Ingram Court Co-op hearing as well as some of the ADU meetings we had, and it eventually devolves into parking conversations on where the cars are going to go, and that becomes the neighbors' rallying cry against most of this, because no one's going to come out and say that they're against housing people. They'll instead say that where are these cars going to go? They're going to park in front of my house, and they need to be reminded they don't own that space in front of their house. But it's still to go with your point, addressing the mobility equation alongside that is going to help move the conversation forward, I think.
Yeah, Mason, go ahead. And then Jacques.
Yeah, I think we can refer to the last 10, 15 years of Jay's professional career if we have any questions about public pushback on ADUs, for sure, since he was the primary in that entire process. My second question on this is, you had mentioned way back when you first started this conversation that what can we get done, which we've heard several times about, thinking that it would be on a cement pad. I don't think it's a conversation of either or, because we've already done the legwork on pads, and like I said, Jay could talk to that. The part about mobile tiny homes for me when you're talking is that what I'm curious about, and Jacques, you mentioned this in your opening statement as well, that yeah, we have all these outdoor backyards, but what about the equity lens? So what I'm hearing from both of you guys talk about is landowners building more homes to benefit themselves with add value to their properties and the ability to get rent. What I'm not hearing a lot about is how the whole reason why tiny houses with wheels was brought up, or mobile units. I actually think we're going to see huge storage containers becoming a big thing because they're not easily moved, but they're movable. So somebody could live on their land for a year and move that as well. So I think that's also going to enter our discussion at some point. But I'm curious, when you guys are doing your research and looking into this, is if you're considering shared equity as the driving force behind mobile homes.
My answer to that is I don't have a good answer for how to do that. I don't know. I don't know that anybody does. I do know this. Generally speaking, things on land, especially in this town on a fixed foundation, add value. Things on wheels depreciate. They go the other way. They don't increase value typically. I can see maybe that there's some ownership value and I own this and it's worth, I mean, it's worth something to the person who owns it, but I have not come up with a solution for building a backyard tiny home and the equity value going to anybody other than the person who owns the main property. I don't have an answer for that. But I don't think that there's tremendous equity increase or equity value or gain, financial gain in a mobile tiny home. I mean, the more you move it, the older it gets, the less it's worth. That's kind of the reality of things on wheels.
Yeah, Jacques, go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Oh, I can't hear you. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think a couple of things, and I do have kind of a review of some of these pieces, but I think one point that is worth making, and it goes to the equity piece. And again, it's the perspective of the person who will be living in this. And I think, Terry, from one perspective, we could say there are many people, quite a number of people, it's a fairly lively community who do value the tiny home concept, and especially the mobile one. And so if we already have these ADU rules in place and, they're there, I don't understand why we would limit wheels versus no wheels. And I'll kind of get to why that is. First of all, when you look at the kind of the focal point of this, it really comes down to, I think, understandably, concerns about somebody looking into their neighbor's backyard and feeling like there's a Airstream parked back there, right? But most of this requires skirting. It requires certain types of cladding. It requires all of the utilities hookups that would be required. And what's interesting is, as I went through the code, the ADU definitions would simply need the addition of a mobile ADU, which I've put together, and I'll send this to all of you guys after we're done. I don't know that it's worth going through it point by point right now. And the second piece is the lack of a foundation, because our current code requires it to be on a foundation. But if we take our current codes and we marry the ADU regulation with the mobile home regulations, everything that's required, you know, there's a big question of, oh, what's it going to be to design these tie downs? Everything that's required is already a part of the code, and it is in section 10 of our, I think it's 10 of the, yeah, it's 1012 of the code. So we have all of these things, and my point would just be, there are people who do have these units. They've already built them, they've already bought them, they've already created them, and all they're looking for is a place to put them. And so why are we limiting that place to put it? And what are the good reasons to limiting that?
John, with the equity question on it too, I would like to ask that, you know, like, I get, Terry, your perspective on equity of looking at increasing land and the decreasing value of a tiny house on wheel. However, I would posit that an individual who just spent $75,000 building out a tiny house isn't paying rent, but might have a slip fee on that. And if they stay in that tiny house longer than the 3 years, they're still, then they have no rent or payments after that. And there are a lot of people that are retiring in these. The other thing about equity on this is that there are a lot of individuals who can't afford to build an ADU in their backyards. So it's a way for them to avoid the $100,000 to $150,000 to even $200,000 cost to build an ADU in their backyard, when they could put a $25,000 infrastructure for water and put it and share their backyard with somebody who already has a built place for retirement or has already spent their money on that. So there is something to look at the equity in that, not just the devaluing of a vehicle that's on wheels, but that, or, you know, that there is a way that individuals, some people have already built theirs themselves and are just looking for a place to park. So something to consider is the equity lens you're using when viewing these.
I hear you. And just to clarify, I'm not against tiny homes on wheels. I prefer fixed foundation tiny homes. So I'm not saying it's either or. I'm not saying you have to have one versus the other. From my perspective, my opinion, one guy's opinion, I think the fixed foundation tiny homes are a better option for a lot of reasons. And I think they have a better chance of getting more of them. Because I think there's a lot of reasons for that, why I think that, which we've kind of covered.
Thanks, Terry. I'm gonna reel the conversation in a bit. Danny, your hand's been up for a while. Sorry, go ahead, and then I have something to say. Go. Thanks.
I'll be quick, but I like the way Jacques highlighted the issue and the fact that, you know, we can look at both of them, and it's really how far are we regulatorily from being able to look at both of them. But the thing that really I want to kind of just remind everybody, what really jumped out to me, because I see a lot of merit in both types, but when we had that listening session, one of the things that was really elucidating for me was the fact that the builders that came and talked, the people who own the tiny homes that came and talked, what they said to us is, you know, that we needed to understand that most of them were built in a mobile capacity. I remember that because it was you know, a real surprise to me. I wasn't aware of that. And if that's the case, and that's how most of them are built, and that's how most of them are owned right now, I mean, that's something we have to wrestle with, right? The fact that that's, you know, we had two different manufacturers of tiny homes there, and they both made that point to us. And I remember that specifically. And so I think, you know, the whole notion of a fixed tiny home, it's essentially an ADU, right? Maybe a little bit smaller. It would be great to see if we could have some sort of regulatory adjustment so that it would be easier for them to do, because the problem is once you build an ADU, it's so expensive, like we've talked about with everything else, that you're trying to, you know, recover as much as you can from the outlay that you've put into it. But I think we need to figure out how to wrestle with, because we don't have anything for it right now, the mobile tiny home, because that's something where there seems to be quite a bit of supply, quite a bit of ownership, and nothing really to facilitate utilizing those right now. So that's where I think, you know, maybe we can try to figure out how to expedite that, especially, you know, there's a much more immediate and much more temporary aspect to that. And if we can figure out a way to get that done, I think it might be able to serve the actual community based on the testimony that we heard at the listening session. So.
Thanks, Danny. So this has been a really great conversation. I'm wondering, Jacques and Terry, considering all these points, how would you suggest, you know, we as a board, you know, proceed, and perhaps you two spearhead this effort, and, you know, potentially working with planning board? You know, seems like there are lots of different ways to approach this, but you know, in terms of actually like moving forward with something and you know, bring something into fruition for council to review, what do you think? Go ahead, Chuck.
What I'm hearing right now is, I think there's two potential areas that we might want to think about putting together a tiny home kind of recommendation. Or the one comes off of what Terry's saying, which I think is, you know, how do we increase the numbers that we're getting? What kind of systems can we put in place, or might we recommend, that would increase the number of tiny homes that we're getting in backyards, and try to increase the rate of acquisition on those? So I think that's one piece that, you know, as we're seeing, we're getting more ADUs, awareness for people that their ADUs can be 200 square feet. You know, some of it may just be that, some of it may be some of the processes that Terry was mentioning about some kind of lease situation, although I can see that there would also be some concerns with that, I think, kind of again from the political side of things. But so that's one. The second piece, I think, is, and you know, this is the one that I've kind of been digging into, is, does it make sense to try to include the tiny home on wheels into our regulatory structure to allow that to happen? It's in a way, it's an unused asset that's out there, and we don't have any way to, even if that's 100 units, we don't have any way to bring those 100 units online in the city. So I would think that maybe Terry and I can talk more about both of these things and kind of work through some of it, because in a way it's a good thing. Terry definitely has, you know, a different perspective than I do on the wheel things. So it would be a great process anyway to spend a little bit of time for he and I to work through that some more. And then maybe at the next meeting, I can send you what I've got, and we could look at those two things and just see if HAB wants to move forward with anything in this. You know, that's my thought.
Good plan.
I think that's a great plan. And if anyone has, you know, feedback or input, you know, for you to consider, you know, I'm sure you're willing to, you know, read emails, engage with other members of the board on this too, if that's allowed. Is that allowed? Don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's just you two. Sorry. Don't want to break the rules.
Before we move on, Starlet, can I, a quick question for Jay? Jay?
I'm here.
Oh, any historical background on tiny homes on wheels as far as efforts to get them allowed or approved or regulation or anything like that? Has that gone up the flagpole at all with planning board or council, anybody along in the last 5-10 years?
I would say no, but Mason seems to think there's been some discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jay, specifically, there was a discussion, boy, it's probably been like 2 brought up once. I mean, Lisa was having the discussion big time, but I started saying yes before you said Boulder, Terry, because I sat through the whole discussion in Lyons when they first discussed what was happening across the country for tiny homes on wheels, what were the barriers, what were the biggest concerns, how they could make it happen. And they acknowledged, boy, was that last January? I mean, time feels like a warp. maybe it was a year ago, 2 years ago now already. But they looked, their attorney, their board of trustees attorney and planners looked across the country to see who had allowed these and what they looked like before they allowed them. So they're legal in Lyons, and they already have a written, and Peter, you can probably speak more to it.
Peter, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to stop you. I was just putting my hand up to tag on when you're done. That
Oh, no, that's about all I had is
okay.
I was shaking my head yes to Terry before I realized he was talking specifically about Boulder. And, you know, Lisa Morzell brought it up because of her friends up in North Boulder that were getting booted from their property with the new development up there. And I know we put a stay on the couple of tiny houses that were up there while we worked this out because there was some discussion about it being allowed. But Peter, you have
I
been
was gonna bring up something happening in Longmont, the Veterans Community Project. That is something that if there's not movement at the city of Boulder, nothing gets Boulder's attention, like being shown how they're being shown up. And so
yep.
digging into that project, and I'm working on a project nearby. And so I'd be happy to meet anyone over on the property at any point. It's kind of a neighbor property to something I'm working on with a client.
And there, Peter, on top of that, there is a very big developer in town that has worked with the city on multiple projects that is very interested in doing one of those, the Longmont Vet project here in town, not with vets, but the same form on a property.
Sure, send me a note.
Jacques.
So just one last quick point to Terry's question. Again, before you said Boulder, I talked to Daniel Fitzpatrick, who's the president of the Tiny Homes Association. He's done a ton of work on this. He has written the ordinance for LA, who now allows tiny homes on wheels. Fresno allows tiny homes on wheels. There's Lyons. Those are the two ones that come off right off the top of my head. But it's definitely the code and the regulatory structure has been getting hammered out. And actually a lot of what I have is stuff that's come from Daniel. And then I kind of pulled together all these other places and started parsing through it to see what that might look like. So there's some movement towards it in other locales.
That's great. Hens. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I think this is great, the work that both of you are doing on this. And I look forward, it sounds like you're going in the area of seeing if you can remediate or suggest different regulations in some way that would facilitate moving ahead with tiny homes on wheels or stationary. And I think it's great. It's good to hear this, and we're all happy about it.
Mason.
Jay, do you want to add anything to this discussion? Because I know that part of your ADU research, didn't you guys touch a little bit on tiny houses with wheels when you were exploring questions?
Yeah, it was interesting. It really didn't come up.
No, I thought there was a couple meetings I sat in where different people had talked about.
I think, you know, people may have said, are you going to address it? And I think our usual refrain was, we have a very narrow scope, and it's really focused on ADUs on a foundation. So it was supposed to be minor changes. They ended up being a lot more than minor.
Yeah, right.
But I would also, I mean, since you asked me, I was just looking at the letter again to council, and I noticed it talks about the tiny home village, but it doesn't talk about tiny homes on wheels. So something for you guys to think about. Yep.
And Jacques, I would add to the Tiny House Association with Daniel, talking to him. So there's 4 national tiny house associations, and they've all bickered between each other about who runs what and does what. But the first step in all of it was the adoption of those recent codes. And I know that they had to happen, and Peter, again, jump in. From my understanding was that was the first step in trying to knock out the pegs that would get us to the point of being able to allow a tiny house on wheels. But that was a big one, was this latest adoption of building codes.
But I would also say, sorry, Mason, I would also say, I mean, communities have been doing it for years. I mean, Portland has allowed tiny homes on wheels.
Yeah, this is a political will, like Jacques started this whole conversation out with.
Full circle. Wheel.
All about the wheel, man.
Something about those wheels.
Sorry,
We were
Madhu's.
all once hippies when we got here, so I don't know what the problem is with the wheel now.
I love it. Well, this is great. Jacques, Terry, seems like you two have a lot to discuss. And Peter, thanks for the invite to, come check out that project you're working on. That's really awesome.
To be clear, my project that I'm working on is adjacent, but
Oh, okay.
neighboring
Yeah.
parcel. And that project that HMS is doing is very much a part of what we're doing because of the roads that'll be built. So, and it'll be fun to show it to you what we're doing out there. I think you all like it.
Very
It's
cool.
outside of Boulder, so I'm not constrained.
Exciting. Venturing out. Okay. Anything else before we move on? All right. We're going to move on to talk about the annual letter. You all should have received an updated version. I revised it again because last meeting we decided to table our listening session on housing insecurity to 2021. I think this is a really good move on our part. So hopefully you all had a chance to look at the letter. It's different slightly, and I would like to get everyone's thoughts. If you have specific edits, I'll mention just a process point. If you have specific edits or suggestions, it would be best if you email them to Corey and she'll email them to me. It's tough to do the editing on the screen. However, if there are specific things that you want to be included, that you want to discuss as a board right now, then I'm more than happy to do that. I'm very excited about the letter and would love to hear everyone's thoughts on it. If there are any.
Great.
Sorry, what was that, Terry?
It's great. Great letter.
Great. Judy, go ahead.
So I had talked to Charlotte about this before, so she won't be surprised. The part of what did not work well for the Housing Advisory Board in 2010, I feel that it's a little long and each section could be cut by some and I could send those. But I also thought that we could still say exactly what we want to say, but say it in a more positive way. It has been my experience that council responds better when they're invited to embrace new thoughts rather than sort of scolded. And I was that's just my opinion on that. But the other part, and I'm happy to hear what people think about that. But on the other part, the suggestions for council, the long-term goals, I had asked Corey, who then sent me to Charlotte, to find out how the tally went, because that the long-term goals didn't especially seem reflective of how the tally actually went, and that also at the last meeting, Juliet and Danny weren't there. So I feel that these are important enough, since we're saying these are the issues we care most about to council, that we should actually just at least give a hand thing if we like all of them, or make sure that there's no new ones. And the one that I feel is, well, the two at the bottom, the consider reallocating portion of the city funds, that didn't seem to get a lot of votes in the tally, although it was somebody's first choice. But also the Boulder Housing and Human Services Housing First initiatives, I, number one, don't understand it, but it wasn't one of the ones in the tally suggestion, I don't think. But the one that was left out of the tally suggestion that I thought lots of people liked when we talked about it at meetings was to simplify the review process for residential permits to decrease the difficulty and expedite it for middle and lower price housing. And I thought that was one we were all pretty into. And so I just think we owe it to ourselves to really see that there's consensus on all of these points, or at least majority.
Great. thanks, Judy. Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to add that to the long-term goals. You know, I included Juliet's recommendation about the reallocation of funds because I really like that one, and I feel that that's a really you know, creative and innovative approach. I do think it's important that our top priorities are reflected here, and there are also some that I personally feel should be on here. I added one that, you know, I added an additional short-term goal in response to recent events that not everyone got to vote on. So that's something that I think that should be included. But of course, you know, I want to make sure everyone gets their voice heard. So Judy, do you have do you have an issue with the long-term goal around reallocating funding, or do you want to speak to that?
Well, first of all, I noticed that in the tally, it really only got 1 or 2 tallies. And yeah, I sort of think that's out of our bailiwick. And I'm not as interested in that. If we're only going to do 3 or 4, I'm more interested in the one it seems like Danny and Terry and Jacques have been talking about a lot. I'm much more interested in that. I would just like to make sure we all know that we're all invested in the ones that we're forwarding to council and that there's a majority for each one. So rather than me saying what I'm for or against, to just sort of do a show of hands about each one. And if there's a majority, fine. Or if people want to discuss, fine. But I think this is important enough that we should have a dialogue about it a little.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm definitely going to add the simplifying the residential review process to long-term goals. So that's perfect. Danny, go ahead.
I agree with Judy's comments on the tally. I think the letter's great. I don't think it's too long. I think it's tough to pack everything in the 2 pages, and we've done it. So very nice job. I'm sorry, I was stuck in West Phoenix or Southwest Phoenix or something last month, and so I didn't get to hear the discussion there. But I think all in all, I mean, I think the letter's great. I think we probably should figure out the tally thing. I'd be happy to hear if we're going to put that whole notion of the expediting the regulatory stuff back in, particularly some of the that we've had today. The one other thing that I would flag is what Jay brought up, given the conversation we had on tiny homes. Do we want to nuance that a little bit? Because right now it does very much look like a tiny homes village. And I think Terry was right there. That's a great idea. Land's really tough to come by in Boulder. And so both of the approaches that we talked about today, I think there's going to be a much better chance that we see those more quickly than we're going to see a tiny homes village developed, you know, somewhere close to the city of Boulder. So that would be the one thing to throw out there. Maybe we want to discuss a little more is, you know, how we're going to approach tiny homes on this.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I totally agree. You know, this discussion tonight has been really enriching, and I've definitely learned a lot. So I would definitely like to change that, and maybe Danny, if you have a suggestion around how to phrase that, you know, feel free to send that to me, or we can, you know, come up with that language right now. So if we, I guess process-wise, I'd like to first let's just go through these goals and make sure that there's a consensus around each of them. That would be my suggestion. So we can do long-term goals first. The first one is the tiny homes village, but we're going to change that to, you know, Terry or Danny, Jack, do you have suggestions, or any suggestions around, you know, what that goal would be? Yeah, go ahead, Danny, do you have?
I think and unless anybody has any consternation with it, I'd like to see something that had a little more breadth to it, and something where we say, explore potential avenues of employing tiny homes, including tiny homes villages, tiny homes as a special ADU or something like that, and tiny homes as mobile tiny homes on existing properties or something like that, but that we have something that includes all of those aspects, because it sounds like they all have merit and hell, I mean, we're trying to get as much as we can wherever we can, right? So that's my one suggestion on that we have something that's a little more open-ended.
Love it. Does everyone kind of like that? I like that. So good. Like a wizard, word wizard.
I'll draft it in a little bit.
Oh, I just wrote it.
Okay,
yeah, I was typing while you were speaking. And then after that, let's add, simplify residential review process for Jacques. What did you say? I can actually pull it up, but you were talking about, renovations, addition. Do you want to provide some more color around that?
I have what that was.
Oh, you do? Great. Do you want to read that to me?
That used to be was to simplify the review process for residential permits to decrease difficulty and expedite time for medium and lower priced homes.
Okay, perfect.
That was just what we had in the tally.
Yeah, I think I had. Did I send that to you? Oh, good. That's easy. Perfect. And I'll just pull from that.
And then also, I just want to point out to everyone, as long as they're making these decisions, when we had the joint meeting with HRC, and we all made our recommendations, there were a couple of things that we loved that we should each mention to see if we care about. And one of them was we were really interested in talking about sanctioned encampments. And we were also really interested in an oversight committee for the unhoused. And I don't know if that rises to the level where you guys want to include it or not, but we should see if there's interest in those two. And again, I don't care. I just want to make sure that we have a process for each thing.
I'm just writing here. If anyone wants to jump in on that, please feel free. Okay.
I'll jump in and just say that I think some of those things, Judy, staff made clear that it would be hard for them to put their effort behind some of those things, and that there were other things that we would have more opportunity to focus on and actually get something done. So I was trying to prioritize, or in my recommendations or my vote, to prioritize things where I think we could make a quick impact in a way that we would get the buy-in and support of staff and also the support of council. So to me, to your point, asking about that, reallocating a portion of the city's current budget for law enforcement and putting it towards Boulder Housing and Human Services and the Housing First initiatives, we know that works. We heard it tonight from the folks from EFA and Housing and Human Services. And if there's a quick way to take budget funding that already exists and reallocate it towards housing that we know will be effective, to me, that's a win-win for everybody. It takes care of a lot of the social issues that we have right now and the discord that we have, and it helps in an area that's desperately needed. So if I had to prioritize, or I was going to ask City Council to prioritize things, I want to see something that's actually going to happen and can happen quickly. And it seems like there would be a path to something like that happening.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Juliet. Does everyone feel comfortable leaving the C? C. I'm seeing what I'm writing and you're not. The reallocation point that Juliet just made. Does everyone how's everyone feel about leaving that on the letter? Can you raise your hand, or do you have a comment, Mason? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Not a comment so much as kind of a question. I understand what Juliet's saying about getting things done, and I'm curious, like, what would this look like of us doing? So if council said, yes, go ahead, do this long-term goal, what does that actually look like for us? I believe in this and absolutely think it needs to occur, but does that mean that we're going to we as a board are going to take a look at their budget and tell them where they need to take money from to allocate over? And
I have an answer to that. And I think, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's not our role.
Right.
Our role is to make recommendations
Right.
and around housing. So how can we get more people housed through housing first initiatives?
Right.
We could recommend to council, say, we know you have limited funds, city manager, you have to reallocate things a certain way. And here's a way that would be positive for the community when we think about policing and law enforcement, and it positively impact people. I think it kills a couple birds with one stone, and we don't, that's it. We're just making a recommendation because we see that as something that we could make an impact. So we don't administer anything. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So what I'm curious then is this just a recommendation? Should we just write a recommendation that and then we put this together that we would all agree to if we all feel like it's something? Because I agree with it, but it sounds like it's just a recommendation, not a long-term goal.
The headline.
I think that's, yeah, sorry. Go.
I was just going to say the headline of this topic area is suggestions for council's 2021-2022 housing work plan. So all we're doing is suggesting this for their work plan. That's in these points here.
I'm just going to jump in also and say that one of our functions is to study and recommend to the council. I'm reading from our website, to study and recommend to the council and city manager long and short range goals, ordinances, funding priorities, and programs to address recognized housing needs. So that to me aligns with what this
Absolutely.
Is. Yeah.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with all of that. I'm just trying to say, what does the next step look like? And she's right. If we're just recommending to council that they put this on their work plan, then I get it. I get it. I was thinking that it was something we would have a part in.
That would be nice.
In 2021, but I didn't know what that would look like moving forward. So that's all I was trying to get clarity on. I'm for it. Totally for it.
Charlotte, question.
Okay, Terry, and then, sorry, Danny, Jacques. I don't know who came up first. It'll be Danny and then Jacques. Okay, go ahead, Terry.
Just a question. Is there a reason why we're specifying taking money from law enforcement versus some other department or division?
No, nope.
Well, I will say, yes, there is. My rationale, Terry, was because there has been so much vitriol against law enforcement because of the racial killings and things that have happened over the course of this horrible year, that people want to defund the police, right? And I think without necessarily defunding the police, you're just making a reallocation towards something that's really helping some of the root cause of why law enforcement is having to play such a big role. They're asking to enforce laws. They're being asked to be mental health professionals. They're being asked to be social workers. So if we just take some of that money and reallocate it, I think you get some calm without, that sort of satisfies this. And I don't like personally the phrase defunding police, because I think it triggers a whole set of people in a way that's unnecessary. But I think there's a way to reallocate and look at things a little bit differently. And that's why I made that suggestion as sort of a compromise place to address a couple of issues that are going on. Mm-hmm. But I'm open to hearing if there's flawed thinking in that or other alternatives. I want to hear it. It was just an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Terry, go ahead. Sorry, not Terry. Danny, sorry.
So the one thing I'd say is, and just for a point of clarification, and then maybe this helps where we put this bullet point, but we started talking about this. I remember specifically, going back to when we had our first meeting again, when we convened our first meeting, we were talking about this because of the concern that law enforcement had we were talking about like the homelessness issue, and law enforcement had a very punitive approach, and it wasn't very therapeutic. And so there was kind of a double-edged negative sword there. And I think that's where we started talking about that. And so I don't know, to me, it carries a lot of strength when you tie it to that specific issue as well, because, certainly I remember us having a lot of conversation. I think that's when we had our joint session with the human relations, but it was and I'm sorry, I have two dogs that are sparring off here, so sorry about the background noise, but somehow, I mean, that it has a lot of resonance on that particular issue, because we've seen some of the problems that you run into with that, and it's certainly an area that kind of screams for reallocating something to the programs that we talked about today, to some mental health professionals that can help people rather than just treat them punitively, et cetera. And I think that and that goes away from that whole notion of just defund the police in a reactive standpoint. And it's more, reallocate funds. And I remember us using that, dealing with those semantics, and we're saying reallocate funds because they can be spent better here. So that's what I thought. I support it, but that context, I think, carries a lot of weight.
Jack, you're muted.
All right. My 2 cents on this one is, I think it's great to have in here. I agree with the tagging it to law enforcement, because I think part of what that's saying is, other people have been making the point, is that it's not only a reallocation of funding, but it's a reallocation of resources and how we provide services that we're really talking about here. It's in some ways, I guess on the high road, it's not a punitive measure against the police, but it's a recognition that we do not run our social services and police department in a manner that is cohesive and coherent and benefits the community as best it can. And so the funding is obviously a piece of it, but my thought would be that we not necessarily limit this to just law enforcement, or that we add not only budget, but maybe even just the word resources in there, so that it broadens the perspective of it somewhat, and maybe takes it away a little bit from that sense of defunding. That's it.
Well, can I just insert one comment about that?
Yep.
And that is, the resources are already strained. If we know resources exist in one area and we can reallocate them, I think it's easier to just move the money around versus trying to find new money. And that is my point in saying to reallocate from one area to another.
Thanks, Juliet.
Yeah.
Yeah, Judy.
So I think everybody's made really good points. My concern is with the money being allocated to Housing First, because if you're reallocating police resources that have been interacting with unhoused populations around town, those are not likely to be the people who are going into Housing First. So that's leaving them without services or policing. And I'd be more interested. I don't know what Be There is doing. Jay, maybe you can tell us, and if it's up and running, but I'd rather there be more allocation than into direct services with unhoused populations that don't automatically fit into the category, who are still out there. Housing First seems to be humming along really, really well. Those are my thoughts.
Yep, Peter.
There was talk before about prioritizing open space over people. I believe OSMP has a budget over $100 million. If you wanted to get your point across, suggest reallocating funds from OSMP, and then I'll start a conversation.
Judy, Mason.
Yes, Peter, I love that idea. But I'm going to support Juliet on this. I think what we're doing is we're shifting a mentality of we're not a policing city, but a supportive city that's, like, I can't remember what the number is, but it was like something like we just bought a military tactical tank that's like $365,000. Like that to me.
Yeah, we also bought Hogan. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, please. It's so I think what we're doing is shifting, and it's next to OSMP. It's one of the largest chunks out of the budget, if I remembered correctly. Like, and they also got increases the last go around. I know it's part of their union contract or something like that. But I hear, if I'm hearing you right, Juliet, it's what I would support as well. As I think it sets a tone on the fact that we're not trying to set up our police department to do mental health services when we should be supporting that in a different way.
Well, if you could do both, it may lessen the blow to those who feel that.
We're very black and white here, Peter. Get on board. It's one or the other.
You got to pick one to defund or reallocate. All right.
Juliet, do you want to jump in?
Well, I was just going to say that the idea of touching open space just opens a whole other Pandora's box. It's going to trigger so many people that I think we're just going to end up in a stalemate and a big screaming match.
Which I'm here for.
Which you're for. I'm not. I want to get something done and not scream at each other.
I'm not here for the screaming party of it, but at some point that has to get cracked. At some point, somebody's going to have the conads to start stepping up and having a discussion about it. We're going to have to tease it apart like human beings at a table.
It may, but I think we got to take baby steps.
Okay.
Danny, I'm going to go ahead.
So I agree with Juliet. I mean, I think here again, we're talking about taking the money from utilized for one approach on one thing, putting it to other departments that can do that one thing better.
Mm-hmm.
If we say open space, there's no nexus. I mean, what would the nexus be between open space and homelessness and housing, et cetera? So I really like the idea of tying it together so that we're not trying to rethink all your policy considerations, but we're telling you that we think there's a better way based on everything that we've discussed and thought about and really reviewed and heard testimony, et cetera, this whole year. So to me, that's why I really like the whole notion of tying it to that, because instead of law enforcement for a lot of these issues, human services, housing, et cetera. So I'll just say that I like that limited approach.
Well, there seems to be consensus around this issue. I'm hearing from most people that they really like this. Jacques, do you have another? Oh, you're muted again.
I want to just ask a question of Jay on this one real quick. And it does have to do with that second portion of it and the specificity of housing first initiatives. And I guess that's the question. Is this broader than housing first, really? I mean, if we're going to talk about reallocating to make a recommendation essentially, or ask council to put on their work plan, to me, it seems like it's broader than that, or that, you might have a sense of, well, it's better to just say reallocate it to Boulder Housing and Human Services. What are your thoughts on that? How that would?
You could, but I don't know. Actually, I kind of like the way that you're trying to make the direct connection to housing, because this actually did happen. So the EDGE program, the early diversion, get engaged. So that was sort of we contacted with mental health partners to try to get mental health experts to accompany police officers to respond to calls. And that program we really struggled with it. And something that happened just 2 months ago is that the police department said, okay, well, we want to reallocate 4 positions that we have to human services. You bring that service in-house. And starting in January, we're going to have 4 mental health experts responding to calls instead of police. So that allows police to respond to, situations that actually require their expertise. So I think that's sort of the closest example of what you guys are talking about that's happening now. But like I said, I think it makes sense to make that connection directly to housing.
Mason, was your hand up?
Jay, those 4 positions though report to Harold though, right?
No, they're going to report to Kurt. It's going to be within Housing and Human Services. And they're not going to be contract employees. That's part of, what Sarah and Julie were talking about. City benefits, and the pay will be hopefully enough to retain people for longer periods of time.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, Juliet, would you be amenable at all? This is just a question, no pressure. Would you be amenable to changing the wording of enforcement to Boulder Housing and Human Services programs for unhoused people or something like that, rather than specifically Housing First?
Oh, sorry, you're muted. Oh,
I would say the reason it's Housing First is because, am I still muted? We know that Housing First is successful. So that was the idea behind that. I don't want to try to umbrella it, a whole bunch of stuff under it. I want to point it towards things that we know are effective and that get people off the streets and that transition them and that give them wraparound services. We heard it tonight from the people who spoke on our call that is what gets people. That's what gets people off the streets, is housing, and puts them back into productive places.
Yeah. Thanks,
So
Julia.
I feel pretty strongly about it. I'll stop talking.
No, you're good. No, I was just going to say, I agreed. We know Housing First works, and one of the limitations of that program is funding and resources. So I see that money would be well utilized. Judy, I also think I know where you're coming from. So do you want to speak a little? I know where you're coming from on probing that question. So.
Well, the reason why I'm probing it is because if we say Housing First, that means that although the police department has already allocated some money to staff for helping people who are living out on the street or whatever, for that sort of case management and changing that means that we're not, it makes it sound like we're not in favor of that we wanted to only go to Housing First and not to the population that we're asking the police to change from. That's all. But if it doesn't carry, it doesn't carry. And I respect Juliet not wanting to change her position.
Well, and I also would say, I want to just put a little context around that, and that this is just suggestions for council, and they may come back to us and say, let's talk about what did you mean by this idea, and maybe do some brainstorming around it. It's not like this is the only plan and this is what we want and this or nothing else. I think it's more of a discussion point. And I want, a specific discussion point, but I think it's just under the context of a suggestion as part of our letter, which I also want to be mindful that we were asked to produce in a very specific format. And thank you, Charlotte, for changing the format around of the original letter that you worked so hard to draft, put it more into something that council's asked for in terms of the structure, what they're looking for. That will get us some street cred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess I just want to say one other thing. I just wanted to make sure, I only found out yesterday because I listened to the city council meeting. Charlotte, you said you already knew this, but I wanted to make sure that everybody else does, that this year city council's doing the reports in a different way. In the past, they had different board members be responsible for reading and summarizing what each board and commission said. And this year they're having at the retreat, somebody from each board or commission present the information. And
yeah.
So
that was in an email sent to everyone, but yeah, I was going to get to that. Thanks, Judy, for bringing that up. So we can decide now or at our December meeting, who that person will be to present this letter. I'm happy to do it. I'm happy if someone else wants to do it. We don't have to decide right now. But it's a good point to bring up. Looking Looking at the goals then, I feel comfortable with the long-term goals. I will send another round of revisions with additions to everyone that reflects the additions we made tonight. And does anyone have any discussion points around short-term goals? Any questions? Yes, Mason.
Are we going to go through and do a straw poll like Judy requested to make sure that all 5 of these goals were what we have consensus on?
Sure. Yeah, we can definitely do that. Let's start. We can start with the long-term goals since we've already discussed them at length. Jacques, do you have a point? Okay, you're muted.
Jesus, Jacques.
Just really quickly on the first one on A, I just have a question about that, and I think what are we doing, or what is the building upon piece of this? I'm just curious. Quite honestly, I'm not familiar enough with what the governor's done at this point.
So on October 23rd, I believe, Governor Polis released an executive order recommending that, local municipalities, temporary, there's a temporary eviction. Sorry, I just conflated his recommendation on occupancy limits. My apologies. This was his temporary moratorium eviction and late rental fees, which will expire on November 23rd. So this would just be building upon that and allowing Boulder, the council, to, take what the governor has recommended and enact it here in Boulder more temporarily, or not temporarily, more permanently. So that was that.
Yes, great, thanks.
Yeah. There's another one on occupancy limits, but that was more of a recommendation. So, but yeah, we can go. Oh, yeah.
Sorry. Not to nitpick, but so this council doesn't have any authority over evictions. They wouldn't be able to impose an eviction moratorium. They could potentially prohibit late fees, which is what was it? I think, was it Broomfield? I think Broomfield recently adopted it. But basically only the governor or the district, it's basically a state process.
So, so only rental late fees would apply here. Like council, our city council could, make that. Okay, that's understood. Mason.
Oh. Just for clarity, Jay, did I hear around the eviction moratorium with Polis that because Boulder is home rule, that's the reason why we didn't adopt it?
The moratorium applies to Boulder.
Okay. Why did I feel like there was a discussion at one of the councils that this didn't apply or they weren't doing something with it? I could be conflating myself with several meetings, but okay.
No, but I mean, I think the point is, they can advocate that the governor continue to extend his moratorium, and maybe that's just a way to phrase it.
Got it. Maybe that's how we want to phrase it then.
So no, for sure. So
that's how he does it traditionally. I mean, he issued the first one back in March.
Yeah.
Every month he extends it.
Okay. So what is your recommended language change for this?
Encourage Governor Polis to extend.
Oh, okay. So it would be, well, so this would just apply to the eviction moratorium, but our city council could actually act on,
yes,
prohibiting, late rental fees. So that seems important. So potentially encourage Governor Polis to extend the eviction moratorium. And okay, I'm just gonna make some notes and I'll see what I can do on this. I still like the late rental fees one. Yeah. Okay, so if we change A to, encourage Governor Polis to extend the eviction moratorium through 2021, does that hold with folks? How do we feel about that?
Then you could also add the other one as a separate one about the rental fees if the city of Boulder can do that.
Yeah.
I think we're looking to do more than just have them encourage the governor to extend it. From reading some, again, sorry I wasn't there last month, but I mean, what if we said encourage the governor to extend the moratorium through 2021 and explore opportunities to build upon I have to get off Zoom to read it. And opportunities to build upon the state.
Support for renters or something of that sort?
Because maybe it's late fees, maybe it's something else, whatever we can do. We're saying, whatever we can do, we're doing, right?
Statewide moratorium on late rental fees. Moratorium on. I know that, just so you're all aware, I expect that there are some legislators that will be running bills around late rental fees to control that a little bit more. Because right now it's, Wild West. Landlords can pretty much charge as much as they want. There's no limit on that. So, okay, I like that. I'm going to circulate this again. So I apologize, you can't see my screen. The second short-term goal is work with state legislators to immediately provide additional housing and rental assistance. That's slightly in response to the next agenda item, but I'd like to open it up to see what folks think about that. Oh, can't hear you, Mason, sorry.
Are you going to go back and get a thumbs up on A? Because again, we still haven't done consensus straw polling on these. So just,
okay. No, that's fine. Then let's do a straw poll on A. I know you can't see what I wrote, but it's pretty much encourage Governor Polis to extend the eviction moratorium through 2021 and explore opportunities to build upon the statewide moratorium on late rental fees.
Yeah, what I mean by straw poll is just making sure that we're in agreement to move forward. I'm not looking for specific language that, because I know you're going to send out an update, but just want to make sure that we're all on the same page that these are what we want.
Okay. How many are in favor of keeping that in our letter? Okay. That's consensus. Less Terry. So are we good to move on to the next? Okay, great.
On the next, I would just like to suggest continue to work with because I think the city's really worked hard to help so far. It's just that there's lots more coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a small change that I can make for sure. So do we all in favor of keeping B in the letter? Can everyone raise their hand if they're in favor of keeping that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Which one was that?
So that's for looking at B for short-term
Yeah.
goals. Okay, perfect. So we're at a consensus there. And then C is revisit residential occupancy limits in the context of COVID-19, the governor's recent executive orders, and long-term issues raised by community members. And council's already discussed revisiting this, so I think we're just kind of endorsing that. All in favor of keeping that in our letter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Great. And then D is examine cooperative efforts with nonprofits and faith-based communities to implement safe parking lots for the duration of COVID-19. All in favor of keeping that in our letter? Or comments? Judy, do you have a comment on that? You're kind of like waving.
Oh, no, obviously I support safe parking lots tremendously. I'm just not sure if that's already happening with or without us, with or without council. But I think it's fine to put and keep in their attention.
Yeah, we'll know in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, and when we can revise this, again, change things, because we don't have to submit this until like December 8th or 12th. I have to look at the date, but I'm all in favor of keeping this. Sorry, I did not see hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, great. Let's go to long-term goals then, and this is the, excuse me, explore potential avenues of employing tiny homes. Language is kind of funny, but we can change that. Explore potential avenues of employing tiny homes, including tiny home villages, tiny homes as special ADUs, and mobile tiny homes on existing properties. That was Danny's suggestion. Do you have a point, Terry?
No, I'm voting for it.
You're voting. Okay, great. Let's vote on that. Are we good with keeping that? Okay, great. Consensus. And then B would be simplify the review process for residential permit, for residential, wait, sorry, the language I have is weird. Just simplifying the residential review process to decrease difficulty and expedite time is essentially the essence of this point. It can be rewritten, but all in favor of keeping that in the letter. Great. Yes, sir. Moving on. Okay, then the C is consider reallocating a portion of the city's current budget for law enforcement to the Boulder Housing and Human Services Housing First initiatives. All in favor? Okay. So we have a consensus on all of these. Great. And then I just wanted to, I just wanted to say that I, wrote this letter in, with integrity and honesty. I'm not trying to sugarcoat things, in the what did not work well for the Housing Advisory Board. I'm honest. The City Council has clearly been honest with us about how they think, what they think of this board, continually degrading our board, and disrespecting our work. We are passionate people and we deserve better. I'm not here to be a sycophant. I'm here to be honest with the City Council. So that I'm interested in keeping what's written. I don't think it's repetitive, but any other thoughts, Mason?
I just want to acknowledge you for the work that you did on both the first one, this one, and now a third revision on it. These letters are not easy to draft, and it's hard to coalesce a whole board around putting something together, and it's sometimes not easy to put something together and then have somebody pull it all apart. So you've done a lot of work since taking over chair, and I just want to acknowledge the work that you've done on this letter. It's a good solid format and it's well written. Thank you.
Of course, I did my best, and I'm glad we did the straw poll thing. I didn't want to blindside anyone at all. So yeah, Judy, go ahead.
I think you've done a great job, and I think it was really good to have a discussion. I just wanted to mention that our next meeting will be after we probably need to send it in. So I think we probably should vote on we're good with everything today, knowing that you'll make some changes, a little words here and there, but that the gist of it will be the same, because we won't have another meeting to do that.
Right. Yes, Jay, when is the,
so it's not due, the letter technically isn't due till the 18th. But I was going to bring this up. And if the board, like there was not a December meeting, we chose to skip that month because of the holidays and, other a light workload. But I think my sense is that there's enough direction from the board in terms of the letter that you could vote on it tonight if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Give Charlotte the freedom to make sort of minor editorial changes.
Yeah, it looks like our meeting's actually on the 16th, and then it's due on the 18th. Yes.
Yep. So you could easily do it next month as well. I just wanted to throw that out there.
For sure. So, I mean, with that said, I'm comfortable bringing a motion to approve this letter, allowing me to make minor changes. And then, of course, having Corey resend it to all of you so you can review it, full transparency before we send this to council. We can decide at the next meeting who will want to present this in January at the retreat. I'm not sure if that's going to be in person or virtual, but virtual. Yeah, I think so. Yep. So Jay, would I make that motion or does someone else need to make that?
Okay, you can.
Okay. Okay. Then I'll make the motion for the board to approve this letter as is, allowing me to make minor edits and, you know, getting all of your eyes on it before it goes to council by December 18th.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Wow, passes unanimously. Brilliant. One thing I was wondering is, Jay, do we have an official Housing Advisory Board letterhead that we can add to this, like a official
I saw
thing?
that. I'm trying to. I was looking for a letter, last year's letter. Corey, do we have anything?
You're
Sad.
looking for something that you can take like a stake
No.
that you can, is you can attach it to the door of council? A thick piece of paper, like,
Hand deliver this to each council member. So we don't. Oh, well. What do you use on our? Hang on, I'm gonna look at our. I mean, we could put like the.
Maybe
we
we
could
can
put like
do
the
this.
mountains. I don't know. It's not a big deal. It's just a design thing.
Maybe we use the city letterhead, and we just put the Housing Advisory Board on it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we could modify what we used for the agenda,
It doesn't really matter, but it
for the
matters.
Housing Advisory Board, and then you could
Sorry, it matters to
turn
me.
that into a memo.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
Do you want me to send you that and you can play with it?
Me?
Or do you want us to do it? We can do it
No,
too.
no, I can do it. I have InDesign, so I can make it pretty. I'll go crazy. Okay, great. Let me orient myself here. Okay, great. Good talk. We're gonna move on to my added agenda item. And this is in response to Polis's press meeting briefing yesterday. I think it was yesterday. The days are congealing, but Polis essentially, he called for a special legislative session, and they mentioned they want to prioritize rental and housing assistance in this session. And I'm bringing this up because we have an opportunity as a board to lobby our current legislators, especially Senate Majority Leader Fenberg, to pass immediate housing relief to remove barriers for municipal action. You know, this includes the state preemption that actually denies affordability mandates in Boulder. And so I just wanted to bring this up as a potential opportunity for the board to make an impact at the state level. And I want to run this by Jay because I'm not actually sure we're allowed to do this.
Sorry.
No. Really?
So, yeah, so I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, but yeah, I mean, you're advisory to council. I mean, staff can't do it either. So it has to be from council to advocate at any level of government.
Okay.
That doesn't, but you can still do it as individuals.
Yeah.
I mean, you can all agree that yes, individually you're going to do it, and you could say you're part of the Housing Advisory Board, but as the city board, sorry.
It's a bummer, but now I understand. What are you gonna do? Anyways, now you know. Send an email to Senate Majority Leader Stephen Fenberg. I'm sure he'd love to hear from Housing Advisory Board members individually.
I suppose also Judy Amabile.
Yes. She's Speaker of the House now.
No, I think she just got elected for the first time this time to replace Casey Becker.
Casey Becker, right? Yeah, she replaced Casey Becker, who was Speaker of the House. Got it. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, now you know. Not much we can do on that, but
I wanted to add one other thing about
Yeah.
COVID in general. It's been a long slog. Everybody has fatigue. And at the city council meeting last night, I'm pretty sure somebody said that Jared Polis was really asking people like city councils to also be ambassadors for things like being safe and wearing masks and this and that. And I just thought I'd mention that. Like, we may not have a very big reach or whatever, but for all of us to do what we can to promote wearing masks and social distancing and washing our hands and all that to get through this so it can be over soon. That's all.
Ditto. Good stuff. Okay, we'll move on to new business. And you know, this came up a few months ago, and I just wanted to bring up, you know, the commitment and participation of each member. You know, this has been a really great meeting, and I think everyone has been super engaged. I'm really excited about the work that Terry and Jacques have been doing. And I guess this came up because a lot of work was put on through different people a few months ago, and it was a lot. It was really straining, and it's just something to consider. We don't, you know, this is just a point I'm bringing up, you know, how many hours are we putting into this board? What do we expect each member to, you know, what is the bandwidth that each member has? And, you know, when I applied for this board, I was very ready to, you know, put in like 10 hours a week into this board because that's what, you know, the application said. And so I like, you know, that's what I was committed to. And so I just, something to think about, you know, what each board member wants to contribute, and, you know, how many hours we feel is reasonable. I just want to make sure that a few individuals aren't, you know, getting dried out from all the work. So that was just something to bring up. We don't have to discuss it or anything, but yeah, just something to think about. That's all I have for now. Are there any additional comments before we go to matters from staff? No, this has been a really great meeting. I'm really happy with how this has gone. Really great discussion. And anyways, and debrief afterwards. Jay, I'll pass the baton to you to speak about things. You're muted.
So I know some people have been having challenges getting communications to city council through a hotline. So I was just curious how many people do read, you know, are able to get the emails through hotline, read them, because I think it is fairly important information just to be able to track what's going on with the city. And I would highly recommend, you don't have to read every email or all the entire email, but it gives you a sense of what's going on. So I just wanted to offer up, if anyone wants to get them and is having difficulty, I can have our IT department look into it. So I could, if the group wanted to, we could also add the HAB list to hotline as a way, but that would require everybody to want to get those extra emails.
I get them already, so I'm
Good.
signed up for them.
Yeah, I was getting them, and then whatever reason they've disappeared from my inbox. So I'm not sure what's going on with that.
Judy, you're muted.
Same thing. I used to get them and then they stopped. So I would love, if everyone's willing, I'd love to have HAB get them so we could all see them.
I get them, but I'm fine with getting them again, and I'll just unsubscribe on my other one.
I got them and I haven't been, so I agree. That would be great if we had that.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
Okay.
Jay, we could do that.
Okay with that. I will try to make sure that happens. I didn't look into it first, so there might be an issue with it. Adding a distribution list to a distribution list, but the only, I guess, one other thing. So I got the sense that, you know, having Sarah and Julie present was extremely helpful. I mean, there's so much going on. And it's hard for me to even keep track, and it's my full-time job. So, you know, I would encourage you to, if there are topics like that, that you feel like you'd like to learn more about, we're more than happy to pull in the right people to have those conversations. So think about that. Mason?
Jay, I really would like to see if anybody else has interest in the board that Julie had brought up.
Yeah.
The group
Yeah.
of individuals coming to speak. I'd really like to see if we could get them on our schedule. Anybody else?
My thought was the housing insecurity listening session would be a great place for them to come.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and that was my next sort of question for the group is, you know, what agenda items do you want to discuss in December? I sort of, you know, floated the idea of maybe not having a meeting in December, but I want to make sure that if we do, that it's productive and that everybody can be there and participate.
I thought we had already, I thought there was no meeting in December, so
That's what I thought.
that get added.
We just pushed it. We moved it back a week like we did this month due to the holidays. So this meeting was supposed to be next week, as was December's meeting. It was supposed to be like the week of Christmas, and so we just pushed it. How many people can attend the December meeting? Can you just raise your hand if you can't attend December?
We're all on lockdown, so we should all be able to attend.
No, what are you doing? That's fine. No. People have things.
You know, I wouldn't mind putting a motion forward of us skipping December.
You wouldn't mind, or you want to.
What?
No, I like it. I like the idea.
I mean, do we have, I guess my question would be, do we have anything particular that we're thinking about putting on there? I mean, that's, you know, the big question, I guess.
I was thinking that we would primarily, you know, discuss the listening session, shore that up so we could do it within the first couple months of January. But, you know, I think we can also discuss that, you know, in our January meeting. So I'm comfortable with whatever.
My only thought was a revisit on tiny home stuff, but that also could go to January. So
Mason, are you going to put a motion forward?
I was waiting to see if Judy or Juliet had anything to say.
I would want to have a meeting, but if people vote to not have a meeting, that's the way it goes. That's great.
you won't show up.
Come then if there's no meeting. Yeah.
If we don't have a substantial amount of things to talk about, I would say let's skip it and get excited to get some things done in the new year.
I just make the point we might all be really bored and lonely by then. So
You might really.
Okay, so all in favor of skipping December's meeting and pushing any items to January, say aye or thumbs. All in favor of it? So is there 4 and 3? I mean, if you guys want it, I'm cool. I don't have anything to do. I'm gonna be on lockdown starting Friday, so I'm good with coming. I'm just saying, it's like, you know, if there's nothing to talk about, I can always come up with things to talk about. So
Yeah, I think things will come up, but within, you know, between now and December 16th, but it's also okay.
why don't we just leave it scheduled for now then, and then if there's nothing or whatever, then we can always continue it, right?
No,
chair
sorry, Danny.
before.
Unfortunately, you would have to, if you want to cancel, you'd have to meet to cancel the meeting.
That's true.
Love it.
I'm fine.
You don't have to come if you like. You don't have to come. What's quorum? What's quorum again? It's 4 people.
4.
5.
It doesn't really matter. I mean, you're not making a decision. So unless something comes up that's required a
Well,
decision.
we did just vote on a motion, and
I can withdraw it.
I'll withdraw.
so I was in the minority, but that's okay.
It's okay. It's really okay.
Really okay.
I'm not upset.
Keep it. I mean, let's just keep it.
Okay, I'll withdraw the motion. We'll keep the meeting.
Okay. Silent majority wins.
All right. So people are gonna have to do work between now and then. Okay.
All right.
Great. Okay. Here's my agenda. Okay. We've done our calendar check. It is 8:50. Motion to adjourn the meeting. Oh, I'm gonna put this is a motion. This is a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. I didn't see Terry's thumb. I think he wants to keep going, but okay.
I want to keep going. Let's keep going. We have things to talk.
All right. Good night, everyone.
All right, everybody. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Sorry.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Charlotte.
Lori. Thanks, Jay.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bonne nuit.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.